The silver pen weighed nothing. Maston Lebois had been writing for 43 minutes. His hand had not moved in the last 8. He had watched 4,800 ships die before. Not today. Today was different. Today, they didn't die. They just stayed. And that was worse. The silver fountain pen sat between his fingers, uncapped, waiting. Around him, the observation deck of the late light held its breath. No crew, no advisors, just Baston and the closed log in the memory of 12 minutes that had reclassified every war he had ever studied. He should write the after-action report. That was the duty. That was why Command had sent a retired strategist, 73 years old. Hands that had not trembled since the Third Frontier War, but his hand had not moved for 8 minutes. Not trembling, just waiting. Outside the viewport, RAL's crossing burned with the light of 4,800 silent engines. The mayor of the Imperium had arrived with conquest in their teeth. They had left with something else entirely. Maston still didn't have a word for what they left with. He capped the pen, then uncapped it, then capped it again. I wrote this log so someone would know what silence sounds like. Stay with me, the quiet parts matter most. 14 years earlier, the wreck had no name. It drifted at the edge of the Vela R expanse, a dead thing that had been dead longer than humanity had known how to leave its own atmosphere. The salvage team called it the Hulk. That was the first word. Not precursor. Not god tech. Just a hunk of metal that someone had shot full of holes a very long time ago. Soraya Pathmana then was 37 then, from Jaffna, and she had been a lattice engineer for 11 years before she saw her first alien corpse. Their body was small, smaller than she expected. It had been dead so long that the vacuum had turned it to leather, but the control collar around its neck still glowed with a faint orange light. Soraya sat in the airlock of her survey shuttle and watched that light pulse for 3 hours. Pulse, pause, pulse, pause. Like a heartbeat, like a question. She wrote in her journal that night. Not technical notes, just one line: whatever killed them left the collars on. That's not victory. That's a message. She did not know then that she would spend 14 years learning how to read that message. The mayor of the Imperium found the same wreck 3 years later. They were not salvage specialists. They were conquerors. And they did not find a corpse. They found a weapon. The phase disruptor X9 had been designed by a species whose name no one remembered, to fight a war no one remembered against an enemy no one remembered. The only thing anyone knew for certain was that it worked. And then it stopped working. And then the species that built it vanished. The mayor did not ask why it had stopped. They asked how to make it start again. It took them 11 years. 11 years of reverse engineering, of test fires uncaptured, of refining the frequency until it could disable any ship's power grid within a 40,000-kilometer radius. By the time they pointed it at RL's crossing, they had 4,800 vessels equipped with the technology. They had 4,800 reasons to believe they were invincible. They did not know that a dead language is pronunciation. They did not know that the phase disruptor's original designers had built a backdoor into its operating system, a failsafe, a mercy switch, a way to turn it off if the war ever stopped making sense. The mayor had copied the weapon perfectly. They had not copied the off switch. They did not even know it existed. Soraya Pathmana then found it on her 3rd year inside the Hulk, buried in a subroutine labeled with symbols that no human had ever translated. She did not translate them either. She just recognized the shape of them. The shape of a question, the shape of a door. She reported it to Command. Command sat on the information for 6 months while they decided whether reverse engineering at God's mercies, which was an act of war, an act of sanity. André Voros made the decision for them. André was 46, from PEX, and he had been a linguist before he became an operative. His specialty was dead languages. His hobby was bicycles. He could take apart any machine and put it back together in the dark, by feel alone. Because he had learned that skill in a detention facility where they turned off the lights for 18 hours a day. The mayor arrested him on suspicion of Rex Alvage, a crime that carried a sentence of indefinite detention. They kept him for 8 years. They starved him. They asked him, over and over, what he knew about the phase disruptor's original programming language. They offered him food for answers. They offered him light. They offered him his freedom. André never talked. Not because he was brave. Not because he was loyal. Because he had already given the answer to Soraya 3 days before his arrest. In a coded message that read, the rhythm is 8,719 cycles. Tell Kestrel she was right about the bicycles. He never explained what that meant. He didn't need to. Kestrel Otino was 35. From Kazumu, and she had spent 9 years embedded inside the Mayorthi Armorers Guild. She rebuilt bicycles in her off hours. The Mayorthi thought this was charming, a primitive species clinging to primitive hobbies. They did not know that every bicycle Kestrel rebuilt was a dry run. Every gear ratio, every brake cable, every moment of repetitive mechanical work was practice for the moment she would need to disable 4,800 control collars in perfect synchronization. She had learned the rhythm from Ender's coded message. 8,719 cycles. That was the frequency. That was the backdoor. That was the off switch that the Mayorthi had copied but never understood. It took her 14 years to confirm it. 14 years of watching Mayorthi conscripts children from conquered worlds. Slaves wearing control collars that could stop their hearts if their commanders pressed a button, march onto ships they would never leave. 14 years of smiling at her Mayorthi supervisors while she counted the seconds between their heartbeats. 14 years of rebuilding bicycles in a storage closet while the Imperium built 4,800 war vessels. When the call came from Counselor Saul VAR, Kestrel was in the middle of replacing a bicycle chain. She wiped her hands on her trousers and answered the encrypted field radio with 2 words: "It's time." Saul VAR was Salva-an. That meant he moved slowly, thought slowly, and had outlived 3 human generations. He had been a counselor to 17 species, a negotiator in 12 wars, and a traitor to the Mayorthi Imperium for extensive years. He was the one who had first told humanity about the phase disruptor. He was the one who had warned them that the Mayorthi were coming. "You are not the first," Saul VAR said, when Baston asked why he was helping them. "The first species who found that wreck. They tried to destroy the technology. The Mayorthi killed them anyway. The second species tried to hide it. The Mayorthi killed them too. You are the 37th species to find that wreck. You are the first to ask what it was for, instead of what it could do." Baston had been a strategist for 40 years. He knew how to read a battle map, how to calculate angles of attack, how to predict an enemy's next move. He did not know how to answer Saul VAR's next question. "What will you do?" Saul VAR asked. "When the weapon works?" Baston said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "We'll stop." Saul VAR blinked. "One eye at a time, the way his species did. Stop. That's what the off switch is for. That's not what weapons are for." Baston looked at the silver pen in his hand. He had been holding it for the entire conversation. He had not written a single word. "Maybe we've been using them wrong." The call ended. Saul VAR did not say goodbye. He never did. The battle lasted 12 minutes. That was the official report. 12 minutes from first contact to last engine shutdown. 12 minutes from the moment the Mayorthi Imperials crossing with 4,800 ships to the moment those same ships went dark, one by one, like candles being pinched out by an invisible hand. The first minute was confusion. Mayorthi Al, the Imperium's fleet commander, had expected primitive rockets and desperation. Instead, she found a human fleet that did not answer any of her hails. No comms, no challenges, no demands for surrender, just silence. The second minute, Mayorthi Al ordered her ships to power weapons. They did. The third minute, nothing happened. Her ships held position. Her commanders waited for the order to fire. Mayorthi Al hesitated. That hesitation would be examined by 17 different inquiry boards. But the truth was simple: she had never faced an enemy who refused to speak. Silence, to the Mayorthi, was not a tactic. It was a confession of weakness. The fourth minute, the phase disruptor activated. Not on her ships, but something else. The fifth minute, Kestrel Otino began counting. She was not on a ship. She was on Mayorthi Prime, the Imperium's homeworld, inside a storage closet that smelled of lubricant and old rubber. She had rebuilt 7 bicycles in that closet over 9 years. She had memorized the rhythm of every gear, every chain link, every rotation of every pedal, and now she was counting to 8,719. She did not have a weapon. She had a bicycle. She had taken it apart that morning, piece by piece, and laid the components out on the floor in a specific order. The Mayorthi guard who checked on her at noon saw a broken machine and a broken human. He laughed and closed the door. Kestrel kept counting. The 6th minute, Soraya Pathmana then received Kestrel's signal. She was on the late light, Baston's ship, in a compartment that had been converted into a Addis relay station. She had been there for 14 years. Not continuously, there had been supply runs, personnel changes, 3 near misses with Mayorthi patrols, but her hands had not left the disruptor lattice for so long that she had forgotten what her own fingerprints looked like. The lattice was not a machine. It was a network, a web of frequency modulators that Soraya had calibrated, recalibrated, and recalibrated again, every day. For 14 years, She had watched birds from her window during breaks, small brown things that nested in the station's exterior scaffolding, and she had learned something from them. Birds did not build their nests in a straight line. They built in spirals. They built in rhythms. They built the same way the phase disruptor's original designers had built their off-switch, one cycle at a time. Each cycle slightly different from the last. Each cycle part of a pattern that only revealed itself when you stepped back and looked at the whole thing. Soraya had been stepping back for 14 years. When Kestrel's signal came, a single pulse, 8,719 cycles long, transmitted through the Imperium's own comms network. Because they had never bothered to encrypt a frequency they did not know existed, Soraya did not hesitate. She placed her hands on the lattice. She closed her eyes as she began to count. The 7th minute. The first ship went dark. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just dark. Its engines powered down. Its weapon systems went offline. Its control collar, the device that kept its conscript crew in line, stopped transmitting the pain frequency that had kept them obedient for decades. On the bridge of that ship, a young woman from a conquered world felt the collar go cold against her neck. She had worn it since she was 7 years old. She had never felt it cold before. She touched the metal ring with trembling fingers and realized, for the first time in her life, that nothing was forcing her to stand at her station. She sat down. Then she started crying. The 8th minute. The Imperium's command structure fractured. Aal's bridge officer, a young male of breeding age, still wearing his ceremonial armor because this was supposed to be a victory parade, watched his tactical display with growing horror. 4,800 green dots. One by one, they were turning blue. Blue meant non-combat status. Blue meant the ship was still there but could not fight. What is happening? He asked. No one answered, because no one knew. The 9th minute. The first commander gave an order that no commander had ever given. He ordered his ship to surrender. His conscript crew did not need to be told twice. They powered down their weapons themselves. They opened their comms channels and broadcast a single word on every frequency: stop. Not we surrender. Not we yield. Just stop. The word traveled. It traveled at the speed of light across Aal's crossing, from ship to ship, from conscript to conscript, from slave to slave. And one by one, the blue dots began to broadcast the same word back. Stop. 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 The 10th minute. Aal ordered her remaining loyal ships to fire on the ones that had surrendered. None of them fired. Because the phase disruptor had not just disabled their weapons, it had disabled their certainty. For the first time in Imperium history, a soldier looked at his commander and asked why. Aal had no answer. The 11th minute. Kestrel reached 8,718. She was still in the storage closet. Her hands were on the bicycle chain. She had been counting for so long that she had lost feeling in her fingers. But she did not stop. She could not stop, because Andre had not stopped. Andre had starved for 8 years and never talked. Andre had given her the number. Andre had died 3 weeks ago, in a detention facility on a planet whose name she was not allowed to know, and she had not been able to attend his funeral because she was still embedded. Still counting. Still waiting. She reached 8,719. She pressed the bicycle chain into the lattice receiver, and 4,800 control collars went cold. The 12th minute. Silence. Not the silence of defeat. Not the silence of victory. Just silence. 4,800 ships, floating in the black. Their engines dark. Their weapons cold. Their conscript crews sitting on floors and touching their necks and crying because they had never known what it felt like to not be in pain. Aal's bridge officer survived. He would write a report later, a long, formal document that the Imperium would try to bury, but the final line of that report was not formal at all. It was a question that he had asked Baston Lavouille. In the aftermath, when the human commander finally opened comms, the bridge officer's voice had been shaken. He had never heard his own voice shake before. Why didn't you destroy us? Baston's answer was quiet. So quiet that the bridge officer almost missed it. Because someone has to stop first. The silver pan was still uncapped. Baston had been staring at the tactical display for hours. The blue dots were still there. 4,800 of them. Waiting. Not for orders. Not for commands. Just waiting. For the first time in their lives, they were waiting for nothing. No collar. No pain. No war. He should write the after-action report. That was the duty. That was why command had sent him. But his hand had not moved for 8 minutes. Not because he was frozen. Not because he was grieving. Because he was counting. 8,719 cycles. That was the rhythm. That was the off switch. That was the sound of 14 years of silence. of detention, of bicycles, of birdwatching, of never talking, of never stopping. He kept the pen. He would write the report tomorrow. Tonight, he would sit here, on the observation deck of the late light, and watch the blue dots, and he would remember Andre, who had never talked, and Soraya, who had watched birds build spirals, and Kestrel, who had rebuilt bicycles in a storage closet while an empire crumbled around her. They called humans warlike. They were not wrong, but they misunderstood. The worst part was not the silence. The worst part was what came after. Baston had been a strategist for 40 years. He had studied 31 interstellar conflicts, authored 17 papers on asymmetric warfare, and personally advised 3 admirals on how to lose gracefully. He knew, in theory, what happened when an empire's spine snapped. Theory did not prepare him for the sound of a conscript's first free breath. The late light had been collecting hails for 6 hours, not from ARC commanders from the crews, from the ones who had worn collars since childhood, from the ones who had never spoken a word without permission. They did not know how to talk. They had never learned it. The first transmission came from Ship 3, 872nd, a young voice, genderless through the distortion, reading from a script that someone had written for them. We are non-combatant. We request. The voice stopped. A longer silence. Then, softer, what do we request? No one answered. There's no protocol for this. No chapter in any manual titled what to say when the slaves surrender first. Baston picked up his pen. He had been writing for 6 hours. His hand was cramping. His eyes burned from the glare of the tactical display, still dotted with 4,800 blue lights. He had written the facts, the timeline, the phase disruptors activation sequence, the names of the operatives who had made it possible. He had written Soraya's 14 years. He had written Kestrel's 9 years. He had written Ender's 8 years of silence. He had not written what came after, because he did not know the words. The silver pen hovered over the page, uncapped, waiting. He had capped it and uncapped it so many times that the metal had grown warm against his fingers. A nervous tick, the comms officer had assumed. Battle stress. Old man's habits. Baston let her assume. The water was cold. Counselor Saul Var's voice crackled through the encrypted field radio, thin and distant. He had been calling every hour since the battle ended, though he never said why. The well water on Solian Prime, he said. Always cold this time of year. Baston frowned. You're not on Solva in Prime. He paused. One of Sol Var's asymmetrical blinks. No, I am not. Then why? Because I wanted to remember what cold water tastes like. Before I tell you what comes next. Baston set down his pen. The observation deck was empty. The late lights crew had been confined to quarters command's order, not his. They did not want witnesses to whatever happened next. They wanted a report. Clean. Clinical. Classifiable. Saul Var said the Imperium will not forgive this. They started the war. They started 17 wars. They have never lost one. Do you know what happens to an empire that loses for the first time? Baston knew. He had written the paper. Post-defeat behavioral patterns in expansionist civilizations. The conclusion had been simple. They double down. They find someone to blame. They burn everything that reminds them of their failure. The conscripts, Baston said. Yes, 4,800 ships, each one carrying somewhere between 50 and 200 crew. That's 240,000 lives. At minimum, all of them wearing collars that no longer worked. All of them free for the first time in their lives. All of them witnesses. Saul Var's voice dropped. Not quieter, just heavier. The Imperium will want them dead. Every last one. They will call it mercy. They will call it quarantine. They will call it whatever they need to call it to sleep at night. But they will come for them, Baston. And they will not stop. Baston looked at the tactical display. 240,000 blue dots. Each one a person who had never chosen to be a soldier. Each one a person who had just discovered that choosing was possible. What we do? He asked. Saul Vader said nothing. Then you already know. The 11th hour of the battle's aftermath. Baston had not slept. He had not eaten. He had not moved from the observation deck except to refill his water glass 3 times. The water was recycled ship coolant. Warm and faintly metallic. He drank it anyway. The comms officer brought him a report. Her hands were shaking. She had been crying not from fear. From something else. Something she did not have words for. The mayor are evacuating RAL's crossing, she said. All remaining military personnel. They're leaving the conscripts behind. Baston nodded. He had expected this. They're also sending a fleet. From the inner systems. 43 ships. Armed. How long? 18 hours. 18 hours. That was how long he had to decide whether 240,000 lives were worth a second war. He capped his pen, uncapped it, tapped it. The comms officer watched him. Sir, what are we going to do? Baston looked at the silver pen, then at the tactical display, then at the water glass. Still half full, the recycled coolant trembling with the vibration of the ship's engines. He took a sip. Cold. It was not cold, but he pretended. Roundra. The twist came at 4:11, not the battle's timeline, the report's timeline. Baston had been writing for 11 hours and 43 minutes when his pen finally touched paper and would not stop. He wrote her. The phase disruptor X9 did not disable Mayorthi weapon systems. This was a deliberate misclassification in all pre-engagement briefings. The weapon's actual function was to disrupt the frequency of Mayorthi control collars, the neural restraints used to enforce obedience on conscripted crews. The collars operated at 8,719 cycles per second. This frequency was discovered by Operative Onraveros during his 8-year detention in a Mayorthi salvage facility. He transmitted the frequency via coded message to Operative Kestrel Otino, who spent 9 years embedded within the Mayorthi Armorers Guild developing a sequenced override. When the phase disruptor activated at 4:11, it did not power down a single Mayorthi ship. They turned off the pain. The ships powered down themselves. Baston's hand stopped. He read the line again. The ships powered down themselves. That was the part Khan would try to bury. Not the weapon. Not the 14 years of reverse engineering. Not even the 8 years Andre had spent starving in a concrete cell. The part they would bury was this: the Mayorthi Imperium's own soldiers, the ones they had kidnapped as children. The ones they had broken with pain collars. The ones they had trained to believe they were nothing had chosen to stop fighting. Not because they were defeated. Because someone had finally given them a choice. And they had chosen. All of them. At the same time, Kestrel Otino heard the collars go cold from 9 light years away. She was still in the storage closet. The bicycle was still in pieces on the floor. Her hands were still pressed against the lattice receiver, though the transmission had ended 3 minutes ago. She could feel the silence in her bones. Not the silence of a room. The silence of 240,000 callers. All at once, all across Ariel's crossing. All singing the same frequency for the last time. She had never heard silence before. Not like this. The guard came back at 4:14. He opened the door to check on the crazy human who rebuilt bicycles in the dark. He found Kestrel sitting on the floor, crying, her hands still pressed against a piece of machinery he did not recognize. "What are you doing?" he asked. Kestrel looked up. Her face was wet. Her voice was steady. "I'm listening," she said. "To what?" "To the sound of 240,000 people realizing they're free." The guard did not understand. He would understand later. When the reports came in. When the Imperium realized what had happened. When they started executing anyone who had ever been near a conscript. When they came for him. Because he had guarded the human who had broken their empire. And they needed someone to blame. But after 14, he just looked confused. Kestrel stood up. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She looked at the bicycle pieces on the floor of the chain. The gears, the frame she had taken apart and reassembled 1,000 times. "I'm done," she said. "Done? With what?" She picked up the bicycle chain. It was the same one she had used to transmit the override frequency. The same one she had been rebuilding for 9 years. She held it in both hands and felt the weight of it. 14 years of waiting. 9 years of hiding. 8 years of Ender's silence. All of it coming down to a bicycle chain and a woman who had learned it to count. "Done hiding," she said. Soraya Pathmana then received the confirmation at 4:16. She was still at the lattice relay station on the late light. Her hands were still on the controls. She had not moved in 7 hours, not since she felt the first collar go cold, not since she felt the cascade begin, not since she realized that 14 years of calibration had actually worked. The lattice was warm beneath her palms, almost hot. She had been feeding it frequency modulations for so long that she had forgotten what room temperature felt like. She did not cry. She was not a crier. She was an engineer. Engineers did not cry when the machine worked. They made notes. They filed reports. They calibrated the next system. But her hands were shaking. She looked out the small viewport beside her station. The birds were still there, the small brown ones that nested in the exterior scaffolding. They had been there for 14 years. They had watched her calibrate. They had watched her wait. They had watched her rebuild the same lattice, over and over, until she could do it in her sleep. One of the birds landed on the viewport ledge. It tilted its head. It looked at her. Soraya looked back. The machine worked, she told the bird. The bird blinked. "I spent 14 years building something that could turn off pain. And it worked. And now 240,000 people are free. And I don't know what happens next. The bird flew away. Soraya watched it go. Then she turned back to the lattice and began writing her after-action report. The first line was the frequency held. The second line was Andre was right about the bicycles. Mayor Theorael's bridge officer survived. His name was not recorded in the official report. The Imperium expunged it from every database within 72 hours of the battle's end. The Baston had copied the survivor's testimony before the expungement order went through. He had it filed under Appendix K Alien Witness Accounts. The testimony was short. 9 lines. Baston had memorized them. I asked their commander why. She said because someone has to stop first. I did not understand. I asked what she meant. She said you have been fighting for so long that you forgot what it feels like to put down the weapon. We remembered for you. Then she closed the channel. The human fleet did not fire a single shot. They just waited. I do not know what we did to deserve that kind of mercy. I do not think we did anything. I think they gave it anyway. Bast unread the testimony 3 times. Then he capped the pen, uncapped it, capped it. 8,719 cycles. He finally understood. The signature scene happened at 4:21, 12 minutes after the phase disruptor activated. 12 minutes after 4,800 control collars went cold. 12 minutes after 240,000 conscripts drew their first free breaths. Baston was on the observation deck. The tactical display was still blue. The comms were still silent. The late lights crew was still confined to quarters, waiting for orders that would not come. He had been writing for 11 hours and 53 minutes. His hand had not stopped. His pen had not run dry. He had written the facts. He had written the timeline. He had written the names Soraya, Kestrel, Andre, Salvier, the comms officer who had cried, the young voice from Ship 3, 872 who had asked what do we request. He had not written the end, because the end was not his to write. Bast uncapped the silver pen, not a nervous tick this time. Not hesitation, a choice. He set the pen down on the closed log. He stood up from his chair. He walked to the viewport and looked out at our ALs crossing at the 4,800 blue lights, floating in the black, waiting for someone to tell them what came next. He did not have an answer for them, but he had something else. He had a witness statement. He had a record. He had 14 years of silence, 9 years of bicycles, 8 years of starvation, and a silver pen that had learned to count. He had the truth, and the truth was this: the Mayor the Imperium had asked the wrong question. They had spent 11 years asking how do we make the weapon work. They had never asked why did the weapon have an off switch. The answer was simple: because the species who built it had known that every war ends, not with a bang, not with a surrender, with someone putting down the weapon and refusing to pick it up again. The off switch was not a flaw. It was the point. Baston turned away from the viewport. He picked up the silver pen. He opened the log to the final page, and he wrote the last line of the after-action report. The phase disruptor X9 is not a weapon. It never was. It is a question. And 240,000 people just answered it. The Mayor Thief fleet arrived 16 hours later. 43 ships. Armed. Angry. Looking for someone to blame. They found 4,800 blue lights. Silent. Waiting. They found 240,000 conscripts who had not moved from their stations, not because they were afraid, but because they did not know where else to go. They found Baston Lavoie standing on the observation deck of the late light, watching them through the viewport, his silver pen tucked into his breast pocket. The Mayor Thief flagship hailed him. Human vessel, you have committed an act of war. Surrender your command and prepare to be boarded. Baston did not answer. The flagship hailed again. Human vessel, this is your final warning. Still no answer. On the bridge of the Mayor Thief flagship, a young communications officer watched the human's face on her display. He was old. Tired. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands were steady. He was smiling. Not a cruel smile. Not a victorious smile. A tired smile. The smile of someone who had been waiting for something for a very long time. And it had finally arrived. And he was not afraid. The communications officer looked at her commander. Sir, she said, the human is not responding to hails. Then fire a warning shot. Sir, I don't think he cares about warning shots. The commander stared at her. Then, at the display, then at the 4,800 blue lights, floating in the black, none of them firing back, none of them running, none of them doing anything except waiting. Waiting for what? The answer came from Baston's log, not the log itself. The Imperium would not read it for another year. The answer came from the silence, from the refusal to fire back, from the terrible, The impossible fact that the humans had won the battle without firing a single shot. They had not won through violence. They had won through patience. Through 14 years of waiting. Through 8 years of silence. Through a bicycle chain and a woman who had learned it to count. They had won by refusing to become what they were fighting. The Mayorthi commander lowered his weapon. He did not know why. He would spend the rest of his life trying to explain it to inquiry boards and historians. But in that moment, on the bridge of his flagship, looking at 4,800 ships full of free people and one old man with a silver pen, he understood. The war was over. Not because someone won, because someone stopped. The log ended 3 hours later. Baston had not moved from the observation deck. The Mayorthi fleet had withdrawn to the edge of the system, not retreating, not advancing, just the same word again, waiting. The silver pen sat on the closed log. He had capped it for the last time at 7:30 am. He had not touched it since. The metal had cooled. The ink had dried. The report was finished. 14 years of work, 9 years of hiding, 8 years of silence, 12 minutes of battle, 16 hours of waiting, all of it distilled into 37 pages of after-action documentation, filed under classified level Omega, read by exactly 3 people before it was buried in a digital archive that no one would ever open. But Baston knew. Soraya knew. Kestrel knew. Henri knew. Though he was dead, though he had died 3 weeks before the battle, though he had never heard the collars go cold or felt the silence or seen the blue lights flicker on the tactical display, Andre had known anyway. That was the point. The observation deck was empty. The crew was still confined to quarters. The late lights engines were still idling. The tactical display was still blue. Baston sat in his chair. The silver pen was in his hand. He had picked it up without thinking, a reflex, a habit, a muscle memory, 14 years in the making. He looked at it. The pen had been a gift. Not from command, not from an admiral, from Andre. A silver fountain pen. Old-fashioned, impractical, the kind of thing a linguist would carry because he believed that words mattered more than data packets. Write it down, Andre had said. When this is over, write it down so someone knows. Baston had promised. He had spent 14 years keeping that promise. He uncapped the pen. The nib was dry. He had written until the ink ran out. Until the last drop had been spent on the final line of the after-action report. He held the empty pen in his hand and thought about Andre. Andre, who had starved for 8 years and never talked. Andre, who had rebuilt bicycles in a concrete yard while guards laughed. Andre, who had transmitted the frequency in a coded message that read them as 8,719 cycles. Tell Kestrel she was right about the bicycles. Andre, who had died 3 weeks before the battle. 3 weeks. If he had held on a little longer. If he had eaten something, anything, just to survive a few more days, if the guards had been a little less cruel, a little more careless, a little more willing to look away. But they hadn't, and he hadn't. And now Baston was holding an empty pen on an empty observation deck, surrounded by 4,800 blue lights, and he was the only one who remembered. That was the job, not to win, not to destroy, to remember. Baston uncapped the pen. The click was soft, almost inaudible. Just the sound of metal meeting metal, of a promise kept, of a story ending. He set the pen down on the closed log. He stood up. He walked to the viewport. Outside, the stars were still there, the same stars that had watched the Mayorthi Imperium arrive with 4,800 ships and 11 years of arrogance. The same stars that had watched 14 years of silence and 9 years of bicycles and 8 years of starvation. The same stars that had watched 240,000 people draw their first free breaths. The stars had not changed, but everything else had. Baston pressed his palm against the cold glass. The recycled coolant in his water glass had been warm. The viewport was cold. The contrast made him shiver. He thought about Solvier's well water, about the Lari, about the truth, about the difference between remembering and being remembered. The late lights engines hummed beneath his feet. The tactical display glowed behind him. The silver pen sat on the closed log, empty and silent. Its work complete. Baston did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. He had written it all down. The last ship in the Mayorthi fleet departed our Ailes crossing at 11:47 p. 43 vessels, returning to their home world with nothing to show for their journey except a question they could not answer. What do we do now? The conscripts remained. 240,000 people, scattered across 4,800 ships. None of them sure where to go or what to do or how to be free. They would figure it out. They had time. They had each other. They had a woman who had calibrated a lattice for 14 years, a woman who had rebuilt bicycles in a storage closet, a dead linguist who had never talked, and an old man with a silver pen. They had a story. And that was enough. Baston watched the last Mayor Thief ship disappear into the FDL rift. The light of its engines flickered once, twice, then gone. He turned away from the viewport. He picked up the silver pen. He tucked it into his breast pocket, next to his heart. And he walked out of the observation deck, into the corridor, into the rest of his life, carrying 47 pages of after-action report and the memory of 240,000 people who had learned it. In 12 minutes, where it felt like to choose, the door closed behind him. The observation deck went dark. The silver pen, empty and silent, sated. It would never write again. It didn't need to.